Hey there, I'm Frank, host of Reader's Labyrinth. The tone, the pause, the starkness, a raw and visceral listening experience, a masterclass in horror. I simply cannot get enough of this genius. Soren, you truly are in a league of your own. By an Apple Podcast review. Of the 20-plus horror fiction podcasts I subscribe to, the production and story quality of Knifepoint, for all its simplicity, stand far above its contenders in the genre. These reviews were taken from Soren Narnia's Knifepoint Horror podcast, available on your favorite podcast app. In the realm of podcasting, there's not very many content creators out there that have been doing this for more than 10 years. But I would like to introduce you to a writer thriving in this format, and his name is Soren Narnia. Soren is the creator and narrator of the horror podcast Knifepoint Horror and the fiction podcast Those Snowy Nights You Read to Me, They'll Never Be Forgotten. Soren is an absolute tour de force in exposition, atmosphere, and subversion of the listener's expectations. But don't look for neat endings or tight plot lines here. Your only friend is the lonely shadow of life's messiness stalking the land. A landscape haunted by bad decisions, mental illness, fragile relationships, and the ever-present threat of a preternatural terror. On a more personal level, I found myself coming to Knifepoint Horror in those snowy nights over and over again, on knees bended by my own personal tragedies and losses. In Soren's tale from the ether, I found a balm which enables me to deal with life's challenges and setbacks. So, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Soren as much as I did. I hope also that you'll consider supporting Soren by joining his Patreon account for as little as $3 a month. A link in the show notes is provided, as well as his podcast and various other works. And if this interview has given you value, I would like to humbly ask that you like, subscribe, and share this with a friend of yours. Thank you so much for stopping by, and please join me in welcoming Soren Narnia. Soren Narnia, welcome to Reader's Labyrinth, sir.
Hey, Frank. Happy to be here.
Awesome. I understand that you were on a hiking trip about a week ago or so.
Oh, well, it's nothing too strenuous. I avoided the ticks for the most part, and really that's the only victory that really matters nowadays when you're hiking. It's good times out on the Appalachian Trail just for a day. Love it.
Well, if you would like some ticks, pollen, and some humidity, you're welcome to come to South Carolina, where the Appalachian Trail kind of sneaks through our county of Valhalla, sir. So
yeah, I'll hit that stretch someday, definitely. In December.
In December, no. So I have some questions drawn up, and these questions come from me being a listener to Knifepoint Horror and your other podcasts, your other works out there. And I've also kind of delved into Reddit. I've delved into some of the reviews. So I really want to get into what makes Soren Narnia tick. So I'm going to start off with the first one, if you're ready, sir.
I'm ready.
All right. Excellent. Well, what's the story behind your pen name?
Oh, yeah. When I was in elementary school, just briefly, I forget what grade it was. There was a kid in our class who, he needed a lot of help. He was developmentally sort of challenged. And they would sit him next to this kid or that kid to kind of help him along. And I just remember there was this thing. He would get so excited and so happy sometimes that he would just start shouting nonsensical words. And one of them sounded to me like Soren Narnia. That's my memory of it. The one long word. God knows how it was spelled. Didn't mean anything. It was just this exclamation of like things were good, and it was just fun to say this word to him. And I never forgot that kid. I never forgot that word for whatever reason. And just that word, when I realized how it kind of split into kind of an odd name, I thought, isn't that just life? Isn't that just like life? Some strange little coincidence like that, and just this tie to a distant memory that you're not even sure how reliable it really was. Yeah, that's a perfect pen name. That's a perfect one.
I love the last bit that you just said there, Soren, and you said how memory can be a little bit spotty, I guess, and how little things that happen in our past can have a big event later, and why those things kind of stick with us. So already I can kind of see the seeds that make your writing what it is was kind of set long ago. So I'm sure that we're going to get into that. So for our next question, one of the things I found intriguing is your work stands on its own, apart from any marketing strategy that I can see. Hence, there are no official Facebook, Twitter, or otherwise hub of discovery. Is the decision to remain aloof intentional, or just how it all worked out for you?
I was just never interested in any of that marketing stuff. I just found it kind of fatiguing, and it just took me away from thinking up stories, which is all I ever really wanted to do. Everything beyond that was just not entertaining to me. Plus, I think I don't really feel that comfortable getting too big an audience. I think I'm kind of happier in the niche of the niche. So it doesn't. I even trying to make the most the simplest effort in that direction just doesn't. I don't know. I feel like a bit of a fraud when I do that. It's like I don't really enjoy it, and I'm probably better off kind of hiding just a little bit, because that's where I feel comfortable.
Well, if by some miracle this interview does make you go mainstream, I would take full responsibility for it.
I will cut you in for 50%. If this is what does it, man, I'm going to hook you up.
Yeah.
I did have a lot of fun on Twitter for a couple of years, just being completely silly, but even that seemed
okay. Yeah.
It was just a bit too much. Life is complex, so I had to cut some things.
Well, it really seems like, and before I started doing this, I was a history podcaster. And if anyone is interested in the Ottoman Empire, I've got the hookup for you. But when I was doing that, what I've noticed is like the promotion it had a tendency to suck up all the oxygen in the room. And you were constantly cross-promoting with other content creators, and you were dipping your toes. I mean, I was doing guest segments for other podcasts. And then slowly, that was kind of the creeping death for that podcast. I mean, I was like, well, I can just delay this episode. Well, they don't really need to know what happens to the Sultan in this year. And so that creative energy, especially towards research like I was doing, I can definitely, see in the decision to kind of step away from that.
Yeah, and you can sense it when you listen to other people's podcasts. You can sense that the marketing and the efforts to expand the listener base, it kind of starts to cross over and slightly infects the nature of the show itself. And I don't like to hear that as a listener. So I wouldn't want to do that I wouldn't want to put the listeners through that any more than they already are. I assume if they listen to one podcast, they're listening to a dozen, right? And 11 out of 12 of those are probably, with the commercials and the Facebook liking and it just kind of, especially with a fiction podcast, and I think it hurts the atmosphere just a little bit.
And atmosphere is something we're definitely going to talk about with your podcast, especially the music, because I am fascinated with how you choose those tracks, why you choose one versus the other, which I have that a little on down the road. So on that note of marketing, do you follow any of the unofficial Soren Narnia fan pages on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or other social media at all?
I don't. And again, it's just cognitive overload that I can't quite work in. But I also figure they would have more fun without me poking my face in there. The conversations can be freer, the theories can be crazier and more interesting, probably. So I don't want to be sort of lurking there in the background and ruining the flow of the conversation.
So for everyone in the Reddit forum that I have been creeping around, Soren Narnia may or may not have been using a pseudonym in there, so be very careful.
Well, yeah. I mean, how do they
You can
know?
watch
How do they
out.
know?
You don't know. Can we
Feeding ever more misinformation about myself into the room.
That's right. Exactly. I like it. So before Knifepoint Horror and the snowy nights you read to me, they'll never be forgotten. What was your writing like?
It was a lot more varied than it has been for the last few years. I would write anything and everything on any topic that floated into my realm, even briefly. I would get enthused about enough to write a story, half a novel, a whole novel. I was very creatively restless, and a lot of varied things came out of it. Now it's been more focused on the suspense and supernatural stuff of recent years, but I try at least once a year to really sort of sink my teeth into something different. But yeah, it used to be total chaos with me. My imagination was just spitting out all kinds of crazy nonsense.
We're going to get into some of that crazy nonsense that is wonderful nonsense for so many of us. So I heard you mention on a few other interviews the influence of Joyce Carol Oates on your development as a writer. What is it about her work which you find most fascinating?
I was a fan of hers for years before I even realized that she also wrote a voluminous amount of suspense fiction.
She wrote some dark stuff.
She has. Well, that's the thing that with Joyce Carol Oates is that a lot of the stuff I haven't even read it all, as good as I think it is, because she works so dark, and it's not conveniently the supernatural that she works in. No. She scratches around in just the darkest corners of the human psychology. These characters that are just terrifying because they just went sideways. And I always loved how so often it's a nice, simple situation, upper middle class people in some New England college town, and everything outwardly is just fine. And then by page 3, you realize that there's just this rot in the center and something absolutely terrible is going to happen. And I always have such dread with her suspense stories because I'm afraid, I think, oh, Joyce, are you really going to go there? Because if you are, I don't know if I'm going to be able to finish this because this is dark. So, yeah, she's really just a great writer. Anyway, yeah, I read several of her novels. She's just excellent with character, excellent all around. She just knows what she's doing.
So your talent isn't just writing, but in producing shoestring budget YouTube videos. My favorite of which are drop-ins, and please correct my pronunciation of this sword, but I believe it's Jarpricon.
Yeah,
can you
exactly right.
Watch out. Can you tell us about the experience of making those videos? Did you have help, and will there be more of them?
These videos, they're really fun, interesting artifacts for me because what they are is it's my attempt to sort of bring like a Tuesday night Zen approach to making a movie. I want to try to sometimes reduce the effort of making a movie to about the level of like doing a jigsaw puzzle at home on a Tuesday night. So when I get an idea, I will write it out longhand, just take some notes, nothing official. I'll grab my phone, I'll grab whatever camera is lying around. No lights, no special equipment, no microphones. Maybe I'll overdub later. And yeah, I won't involve anyone else if I don't have to, because the second I ask someone else to get involved, then it's a thing. Then it's a project, and I don't want that. I want to be really easy and as stress-free as possible because it's just physically exhausting to do. So I'll do a little shot here, a shot there, make myself a nice cup of coffee, and over the course of 2 or 3 nights, it'll just sort of get made. And maybe it'll turn out okay, maybe it won't, but there's just a certain effort level that I can't dive into anymore. So I still like to play around with the camera, but I like to keep it really, really low key and zen. And it's kind of, I ask myself, okay, what don't I need to make a short movie? Not what do I need, but what don't I need? And if I have to play all the parts myself, so be it.
What I really liked about what you just said was about lighting. And that's something that I picked up because, just kind of thinking about it offhand, whenever I watch drop-ins and when I watch Jarpicon, it seemed like a big part of that experience for me, at least, was the lighting. And like in drop-ins, like there's lurking shadows everywhere, which is really strange because when I listen to the podcast version only of it, and the scenes, and I'm not really thinking so much about like the characters or the settings, but the atmosphere in the YouTube was so much different, I guess, than the audio version that I got, simply kind of, what was playing in my head. And I thought that the YouTube version, I mean, very, very a primitive one, right? I mean, you were the only actor in it, but playing the various roles, and like when the door would open, when the second visitor showed up, and when you were sitting in the couch in the living room and the light was coming in, I guess, from an outside lamppost. I mean, it just had this totally creepy vibe to it. And I mean, it really kind of sucked you into it. And the way the shadows would like follow across your face the entire time, I was like, how did Soren do that? I was like, he must have had like a little lamp here and like a lamp over here. And he must have just got those shadows just right for that film.
Right. It's basically I have two lamps in my apartment and I just arrange them so because I'm a big fan of very naturalistic filmmaking, real audio, available light, nothing artificial, and horror is a great genre for that because the cruddier a horror movie looks, to me, the more it sort of works to bring out that atmosphere. So to me, it's just not necessary to go out and buy a light or anything like that. And I'll just, drop-ins was completely overdubbed later. So I didn't even.
Really? It was.
Yeah, every line was because I don't have any kind of decent microphone, so I'll just do the old hook up the podcast mic later on and do it that way, just to make it easier, just to make it more headache free. Because it's just the second a single light has to be moved, or there's some sort of boom mic, I'm done. Like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. Can I just go watch football? Because it's too much. It's too hard. These students, I was involved in a couple of student films in the last year, and just watching these people work, I just got exhausted, and I can't do it. I cannot do it.
Well, I really love the effect of that film, and like I said, the lighting of it. So I guess that was some of the secret sauce then I was able to glean from you about that was the lighting. So I think it's a good time to move from YouTube. And what I would like to do is discuss your overall experience and opinions on podcasting, your experiences, your, where you think the format is headed in the future. So with that being said, your primary creative formats are podcasts. What are the advantages in using podcasting as opposed to other media? And would you ever see yourself switching to something else in the future?
The beauty of it for me is total creative freedom, 100% total creative freedom to experiment, to do whatever I want. And then that great sense of being done with something. When I used to write, and maybe occasionally submit something, there's always that sense of like, well, it's not complete somehow. But with an audio story, I can write it, and when I click upload, there's that feeling of, as a writer, like you want that I'm done with it. I can move on. I took it as far as I wanted to go with it. That's it. And podcasting is one of the few things that gives you that instant feedback. Like even the smallest podcast will start to get feedback. It will get a certain number of listeners right off the bat, which was amazing. So I'm still a big believer in podcasting. I do worry that, like we were talking about, the marketing, big marketing is slowly gobbling up podcasting, but there's still niches. What I'd like to see, what I'm hoping to see, is a lot more experimentation with sound and audio and wildly different formats, taking it to their creative ends. I'd like to hear a podcast that just blows my mind with, wow, that's different, what they did there. I hope we get a lot more of that in the future.
As someone who has a podcast myself, again, kind of going back to a history podcast, a difference I've noticed is that it seemed like in 2018 and 19, there was some sort of silent little shifting of listeners. And I think a big part of that was TikTok and YouTube, with bitter irony as we sit here chatting on YouTube. But I've noticed that it seems like a lot of the interactions have kind of gone down for a lot of the content creators in podcasting. And it's funny that you mentioned the arrival of marketing a podcast. I mean, there's podcasters, instead of starting out with an idea or a passion or wanting to experiment, and no kind of judgment on them. I mean, if it's what you do, then it's just what you do. But they start off with a business plan, and, they will, solicit advertisers, they'll solicit investors. And I see more and more of that as the radio stations too, as they're slowly kind of dying a slow death. Their grant money's running out. They're kind of moving into this, into this format. And I have no idea what it's going to be doing in the future. I know Spotify is going to be turning into the Sauron of the podcast world, as it's fixing to square off with Apple Podcast, and their monetization model and their RSS feeds. They're trying to centralize everything. And what I like about podcasts myself is that it's not a centralized model that you can get your content out there. And monetization can take a vertical as well as horizontal format. But I'm kind of worried about the syndicates of podcasts eventually just being Spotify and Apple Podcast. And I kind of think you're smaller. Yeah.
Right. And they have no use for real shoestring stuff because they want to put their promotion money into bigger budget thing. It's a concern. I think about it a lot. I think for the next 10 years, you can still get by with just being one person with a microphone, one or two people, and whatever crazy idea you have, because there are still outlets. And thank goodness there's always, you can always have a personal website, put up an MP3, be completely independent of all that. YouTube is still more phenomenal than it really should be. I thought by now YouTube would have been gobbled up and it would be like a subscription service thing, and you can't even, a couple of years ago now, suddenly sometimes you don't have a choice as to whether there's ads in your own content now, I've noticed, which is really depressing. But it's still possible to be crazy with a podcast and really go your own way and still find people. So yeah, I hope they just don't find a way to bottle that all up and cut it off.
And for anyone who's listening or watching this interview with Soren, he said something earlier. He said, no matter what your idea is, no matter how crazy it is, go ahead and do it, A. And B, you never know what kind of listeners you have until you stop doing it. And I understand that Knifepoint Horror, didn't it take like a sabbatical at one point where there was only, and I'm kind of going off script here, but when I was doing the research for this, I was reading your show notes in a couple of podcast episodes where you said, the show will not go quietly into the dark, or you said something to that effect. And I was like, oh man, I hope he wasn't thinking about giving it up, which was many years ago, I think. But I'm sure that you received.
There was, it was kind of a big experiment in the beginning. I had about 12 or 13 stories I wanted to do, and then I was done. And then I just happened to notice that the numbers kept going even a year after I had stopped. And I would still get emails from people saying, do you have any more? So I really, it was the listeners that pulled me back in, because I was done. I was like, oh, that's all right. Podcasting is interesting. Now I'll try another kind of podcast maybe. They were having none of that. They wanted more horror stories. And I'm happy to do it because it's kind of fascinating.
And I promise we're going to get into that more. I've got a few more little general questions for us. If you were starting from scratch today, and I think we kind of settled the answer, but I'd still like to hear what you have to say. Would you use podcasting as your main vehicle of getting your content out there? So if you had to start one of your podcasts right now, or a show right now, would it be podcasting? Would it be YouTube? Would it be something else?
I think it would be podcasting. I still love the idea of no visuals. What can you do with sound? What can you do with the voice? I think it would be, because I used to be more into movies, but just the effort level, and I can't get all the ideas I have out of my head onto video fast enough. I just can't do it. I can barely keep up with audio. So I think podcasting would be the way that I would go if I had to start over right now. It might not even be a horror podcast. It'd probably, in fact, be something very different. But yeah, single microphone, me alone in my basement apartment. It's you can't beat that. You can't beat it. What else do you want?
I mean, it has some romantic overtones to it. I picture you alone in the darkness with this creepy story. There's like a candle somewhere, and you're just, you're reading it in with your voice, like that cadence that you can get into. I love it.
In reality, I usually record with the TV is on, has like The Simpsons on mute. not quite the atmosphere that you're imagining.
So, as I recall, and I'm not sure if you did this for all of them. I'm not sure if you're still doing this, but on your show notes, you would license your work under Creative Commons 3.0. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not going to pretend to know exactly what that means, but from your show notes, you said that you would allow anyone to take your work and reshape it as they pleased. And I have to say, Soren, I have never found another writer that had or has such radical open source views of their own creation. And I just wanted to know if you would elaborate on that. Is that only for certain stories? Is that no longer the case? Or what's your thoughts about that?
It's pretty much still the case. I always just like the idea. Anything that appears on the podcast is under a Creative Commons license. But yeah, I like people when they make some bootleg adaptation of one of the stories, or comics, or a black box theater production, or one guy I knew took one of the short stories and he wrote basically an entire novella based on the concept. And I think that's great, because I never was much on the idea that my own ideas are especially sacred. Like all writers, I'm just loitering on the shoulders of giants, and I like the idea of people having fun. And if someone can get a B in their intro to film class by making some 9-minute adaptation of something I did, that makes me feel useful, actually. And I always wanted, when I was a kid, teaching myself how to write, I would get excited over doing maybe some radio play of some movie, or I just think it's great. I think we should all share a little bit more. The interesting thing is, in this country, in America, maybe it's the same with other cultures, we have such respect for the creative work of others that, in general, people don't really jump on that opportunity that much. They're not simply just taking the stories and slapping them up on their own podcast or anything like that. People are very respectful of other people's, the notion that other people's work is their work, and that they should leave it alone. So yeah, as of this, if it's on the Knifepoint Horror podcast, it is under that under a Creative Commons license, and I think it's just fine.
I would pay to see a black box production play of one of your stories. I think that would be totally, totally cool. And I love the underground feel of it. I imagine there's some videos that are floating around out there if someone could do some digging in it.
Yeah, I know a couple of people have done it, and yeah, I always loved the black box theater concept. Anyway, I was very into that. Like, give me a little tiny stage and 12 dubious people in the audience. That I love that idea. Let me work in that arena.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. So I'd like to get to your work then. And I'm going to start off at I suppose an odd place, but 3:13 a.m. And I found this book on Amazon probably 2 or so years ago. And this was after I started listening to Knifepoint Horror. But it was published in 2012. And again, you can get a copy of it on Amazon for those who are curious. And when I was coming up with these questions, I thought 3:13 a.m. would be the perfect jumping off point, despite it probably only being talked about amongst us hardcore Soren fans. However, I detect that a lot of the secret sauce, which so makes your work absorbing to listen to, present in this little book. In fact, I find myself coming back to 3:13 a.m. quite often. And these days, I'm inclined to think of it as something of a window into how you process the world around you. With that being said, can you tell us about the writing of 3:13 a.m., where those ideas came from, and is what I said about it being a glimpse into how you perceive the world accurate at all?
Yeah, that book that tugs at a memory of writing at that point when I really felt like in full flight with the writing, and sometimes it amazes me that I had that many ideas for those little tiny vignettes. And that book, it does reflect my sort of my view of life itself, because it's kind of a sad book, but there's some stories in there, little vignettes that are very hopeful, very happy. I think to me it's kind of like a meditative book, but it's a very sweet book in a lot of ways, and it's how I see life. I think to me life is a bit of a very dark comedy. It's often very sad, but there are just moments of hope and real beauty. And it makes me really happy when I have an idea for something that's maybe 2 pages long that I can actually express, like one of those moments. And I think, wow, like who was I that I had like 30 or 40 of these in me at that time? Where did that guy go? So I hope to get back to more writing like that at some point.
You bring up a really good point about, it's not exactly a sad book, but it's kind of like the secret sadness that humans carry around inside of them. And there was one short story in there about where these people were building, I guess, like a rocket complex. And this engineer had devoted his entire life to building these rockets in the complex. And then the rockets, they took off to go to fight whatever kind of war in outer space. And it had like a very Ray Bradbury-esque feel to it, because he kind of had the same thing. Like when he would describe the surface of Mars, he used the Martians to kind of show the alienation that human beings felt just walking around inside. And there's so many, it's not really conflict in it that that attracted me, but everyone has a different expectation of what someone else is thinking in that little book. I mean, it's like that's something that I really took from it. And that secret sadness, like there's a, like you said, there's a dark comedy and a tragedy to human existence. And you see that with anything as simple as the passage of time. And there was another story in there about, I believe a family, they found a box full of some photos, which I really love that imagery. And I noticed that you do a lot of that in Those Snowy Nights too, about, this father, and you can tell by the photos that he had been arrested because there was a break in the chronological order of the photos. But then after they had reconciled whatever their differences were, and there's something so fragile about human existence. And that's what I like about 3:13 a.m. I mean, it has all these observations about the human condition distilled in those little short stories that you do very, very well. And so I have to ask, will there be another book like it? And how has 3:13 a.m. affected the general trajectory of your writing, if at all?
Well, just listening to you describe it, it inspires me. Like, I want to do another one right now, because
it, guys,
it makes me feel good the way how you describe that. Yeah, it's. I do.
3:14. 3:14 a.m. We're doing it.
Yeah, I do see myself in the long term getting back to that kind of writing, because I do like, what you said about the fragility of life. It's so fragile, and there's such inner loneliness among people in their daily lives. But even amongst that, there can be just these moments, and just to write about those moments where just the beauty of living just squeaks through just for a minute for these characters. I like writing about that. I like writing stories with unexpectedly happy endings. I like writing stories where there are no villains, where people just like each other and they help each other. I dig that. So when I think about the kind of thing I want to wind up writing, that's when I think about that book. And I think about the times I would read some of the stories from that at like an open mic night because they're so incredibly short. And it's a good feeling. I had a good feeling standing at the microphone and writing those and narrating them for the audiobook version. I just felt like I had done something nice. And sometimes nice is just a good feeling. Sometimes the feeling of doing something nice is worth 10 scary stories, even though the nice stuff gets listened to about a tenth as much in my case. But yeah, I'll do another one. I'll do more of those. I swear it. I'm swearing on YouTube. YouTube, it's there. It is. It's a court of law.
That's right. It is forever recorded too, Soren. We're going to hold you to it. So I think that's a good segue to our next kind of part. Themes, feeling, and your worldview in your writing. If I can get my questions here in front of me. As a longtime reader and listener of your work, especially Knifepoint Horror and those snowy nights you read to me, I've spotted some reoccurring themes. Mental illness, suicide, unreliable memories, frailty of human relationships, unsteady employment, and different phases of isolation. First, always mental, and then physical. Not very many authors out there have taken on such themes and weaved them into a tapestry of primal dread like you have. Are these themes a wider sense into how you view the world, humans, and relationships? Or are they literary devices, pure and simple, that you use to tell a scary story?
I do find the world to be a very scary place, and I find life to be inherently kind of unfair. But even as I enjoy it, and I have a much better break than most people, really what those themes are meant to do in the horror is it's all geared toward creating a three-dimensional character. So, and the more three-dimensional the character is, and the more identifiable their problems are, then the more you feel for them when they become isolated and frightened. So it's really more of a character development thing than me I'm not trying to say anything about life. I'm trying to be, I always remind myself to, be more delicate. Life is not this dark. Let's lighten up a little bit here, Soren. You don't have to do this. But I do find that to give a character some real issues that they're struggling with and make them identifiable and don't just pay them lip service, then the listener will start to believe more that that's a real person. So it's partially just literary technique. But it's undeniable that some of this stuff is autobiographical in the sense that this is so many of these narrators are essentially versions of me in the situations, and how I would probably react in those situations, which is I would just start screaming and run or hide. No bravery at all.
I can really get a sense of how you would of what your actions would be in some of these scenarios. And it's really the inflection of your voice whenever you're telling them. Like, I told him to not come near me. Like, especially in Prisoner, I was like, this is exactly what he would be like if he was in the situation. And, it's so authentic. And that's what I really like about it. Mm. And so we're going to go more into the worldview. I heard you ask a host once on a podcast about what I have coined the Soren Narnia box paradox. Your question went something like this. If you had a box and inside was definitive proof of the paranormal, or super reality, as some of my viewers like to call it, either proof verified or falsified, would you open the box if it cost you all the money you had or your house, or something along those lines? So I can't recall how your host answered, but I'd like to put the question to you, Soren. Would you open it, and what are your thoughts on the paranormal?
Yes, I remember. I think that was Amy Poundessa of the Bloodlust podcast. We got into that
That's who it
discussion.
was.
And, yeah, I remember that she said she would. And I reiterate, I'm doubling down. No, I ain't going to open the box because it's going to make an already incredibly complex life even more so. And like, what am I going to do with this information? And what if I pay that money and it turns out there is nothing, and now I am penniless and there's no paranormal or supernatural or anything more to life? That's so. I just don't want to get involved. I don't want to get involved with whether there is supernatural or not. It's just too. What I stuck the words in a character's mouth for a radio play I did once, where he says, when it comes to how we live day to day, what difference would it make? You still got to get up and pay the bills. It doesn't change the batteries in my remote control if it turns out that there's such a thing as psychic powers or Stonehenge is channeling energy to UFOs. But in general, I think there's more to life than science tells us, but only because science hasn't figured it out yet. I don't believe in ghosts or straight up supernatural occurrences. Some things I can't explain, but as always, to me, I'm one of those extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence kind of guys. So I would love to see real evidence of some really good spooky things, but I don't believe in it personally. I never really have. One day we'll have unlocked all the parts of our brains. I think maybe there's some psychic phenomena going on that will reveal itself, maybe. But as far as the phantoms and spirits, nope. I just don't believe in it.
It's that gritty realism coming out in Soren Narnia, folks.
Gritty.
On full display.
Keyword is gritty.
Gritty. My own personal thoughts on it is, are you familiar with the Fermi paradox? And I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole. I promise I'm going to put a period at the end of this, but
I explain it to me again. I've heard of it, but I forget. I keep forgetting it. To me, it's Schrodinger's cat, Fermi paradox. There's too many.
Schrodinger's cat. I know. What? I honestly think that's a word game that a bunch of physicists made up just to confuse us. But so the Fermi paradox goes like this. Oh, sorry.
My fault. Go ahead.
No. You are perfectly fine. It kind of goes like this. If the universe is as old as it is, as big as it is, and if we take a scientific material reductionist view of the world, which is more or less what my worldview is, just in full disclosure, then why have we not seen evidence that evolution has happened, elsewhere on other planets? In other words, why isn't there some galactic federation out there? Why can't we see a Kardashev 2 level civilization when we look out across the Milky Way? Mm-hmm. All that we really see is a dead universe, and a dead universe where we seem to be the only ones there. And there's many and various what they call solutions to the Fermi paradox, and one of which is the zoo hypothesis. And it basically goes like this, is that, and Carl Sagan, I believe, was the, hey, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And the late Dr. Stephen Hawking said that if an alien intelligence, could get to planet Earth through any kind of means, and I know that in quantum mechanics, the idea that a particle can exist simultaneously on two planes of existence, on one side of the universe and the other, and all this higher stuff, I'm probably just squawking like a happy seal at this point. I don't understand it. But if they could come to planet Earth, we wouldn't be able to tell the difference between gods and an alien civilization. And that part right there, and the fact that scientists, them smart folks, I mean, I'm kind of exposing my ignorance here, but on other podcasts I've listened to with like Avi Loeb, and he talks about time travel and how really for them it's just a mathematical and engineering problem at this point. And so when I hear about experiences like a ghost, psychic energy, all this stuff, is it a ghost? I don't know. But I just can't help but wonder, like, if in the plane of human existence, there are intelligences greater than ourselves that could be ourselves from the future, or could be other intelligences out there. And what would they look like? And so for any kind of bracketing that I've tried to build around the paranormal, and I've put it down like, well, my brain is scared of what goes bumps in the night because, 100,000 years ago, well, that could have been a tiger or a dinosaur coming to eat me or something. And just what Carl Sagan said and what Stephen Hawking said, especially about aliens, if they're real, and would they really be aliens when they got here? I mean, they could be another manifestation. That's always kind of given me pause on the paranormal. And I'm like, hey guys, you just don't know. But then again, that's high speculation on just some guy named Frank. That's it. But
yeah, sometimes I feel that way with, it's the silliest thing, but deja vu. Sometimes, when you get deja vu so powerfully, that's when I almost stop and think, man, I know the scientific explanation for deja vu makes perfect sense, but man, if anything would be an indicator all along that there are other us's maybe moving in different time flows, deja vu, I think, would be it. Because, oh boy, when you get caught in it for like a good 7 or 8 seconds, very odd. Yeah, that's interesting about the aliens. I'd always thought, well, let's say there are civilizations beyond space and time. I always thought, what makes us so egotistical to think that they would have any interest in contacting us or coming here? Maybe we're just a teeny little data point in a vast multiverse of similarly meaningless data points. Like I don't stop to try to contact a fly that I see on the sidewalk buzzing around a Snickers bar. It's like not interesting to me. I'm not going to contact it. And have you ever, I sometimes, I think about the size of the universe and the expanse of time. And to me, it never gets old just boggling my own mind about how big everything is and how vast time and space are, because our imaginations can't even conceive of it. That's how. And sometimes I used to work with a guy who was into astronomy, and he would like to say to me, like, have you ever just stopped and think how meaningless and tiny you are in the cosmos and the vast expanse of space and time? I'm like, yes, I have, and I do enjoy it, because it's so mind-boggling that it almost makes me believe that a higher power has created this to be so far beyond us. That's the game. That's like, you know what? You can't even imagine how small you are compared to the vastness of space and time. No amount of watching YouTube videos where they have those incredibly clever models where they'll show you, okay, we're this dot, and here's the moon, here's Mars, and then here's the rest of how far you have to get to the edge of what we know. And sometimes you'll have to scroll the mouse, and it'll just say, keep scrolling. Now keep scrolling for another 4 days, and you're starting to get a sense of how I love that stuff. I eat that stuff up, because that to me is, I don't know, it's proof of something. It's not proof of the supernatural or anything, but it's just proof of how there are forces in the universe that are so mind-boggling that I think our brains are simply not big enough to conceive of them. We shouldn't feel bad about this. A fish's brain is not big enough to conceive of, the works of Shakespeare. Our brains are just not big enough to conceive maybe of the real supernatural that is out there.
What's so fascinating about what you said is the size of the universe. And if we get down to the scale of the universe, we're talking about something where human ontology, epistemology, and even metaphor itself breaks down. Like, it doesn't even come close to it. Like, we can come up with a metaphor for God, for spirits, for obscure mathematics, but we really can't come up with anything to describe the size of the universe. It's just that big.
Yeah, and we can't even bring sense. It doesn't even make sense why it should be that big. There's no sense we can bring to that. Like, why? Why should it be? It's like it's so much bigger than it needs to be.
And then you're talking about a plane of existence where time itself is relative. And I mean, what does that mean even? I mean, time is relative. I mean, we think we know. And then you have things like black holes, quasars. But so here's a scary thought to aliens wouldn't pay us any mind. All it takes is one. And we have people that get their PhDs in flies landing on turds. It's really, really weird field of study, but I kind of think like, hey, there could be a gazillion Googleplex level of civilizations. We could just be another data point, but really it only takes one, which I think would be a disaster.
You sound like a believer. You sound like you're waiting for it to happen.
Well, okay, guys, listen, he figured me out. This is not a secret code.
Drop me a text when they come, because I do not want to miss it. I don't want. I think sometimes that when they do come, it'll be so strange. Like they'll be just light. Or there'll be no communication of any kind. There'll just be little particles of matter, and we'll have to rely on the June issue of Science magazine to tell us. Oh, by the way, these are the aliens. Sorry to disappoint you. There's no craft per se. They're just kind of on your shirt sleeve. We were hoping for more, but that's what they are. Yeah.
Soren, that sounds like the beginning of a damn good story. Oh my gosh, that sounds like let's see, what's that H.P. Lovecraft story where the aliens lives in light and they could use light to travel across time? What is that?
Oh, I'm thinking of the Color Out of Space, but it's not quite that.
I don't think it's
all his stories had some kind of like the Shadow Out of Time was.
I want to say it was that. Yeah, the Shadow Out of Time is what I'm thinking of. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I'm going to have to cul-de-sac this rabbit hole. Although I'm hoping to have you back on. Later in the future, I'd love to go down rabbit holes with you, sir. That sounds like really fascinating topics. So I really want to get into the kind of segue. That was not a great segue, but the snowy nights you read to me, they'll never be forgotten. An absolute gem is what that podcast is. Where does this podcast fit within the broader corpus of your work? And how did the idea for this originate?
Well, I did have a lot of things that I had written that were not horror, and I had like a personal love for all of them, even though some of them were better than others. I wanted someone to hear them at some point because I worked hard on all of them, and it also represents kind of my hope that I will get back to that kind of writing sooner than later. Now it's been, I think, more than a year since I posted like an audiobook to that podcast, and I think about that all the time. And I have another one that I want to work on. I really want to work on and do it. So it's good that podcast, and I think of it just as a fiction archive, really more than a podcast. But it's good that that's out there, and I still have it going because it reminds me of, there's more to the creativity than writing another suspense story, even though I do enjoy those. But I want to get back to it, and I also just I do want people to think of me as someone who's not dark or strange or sinister, and I think a lot of those stories evidence that pretty well.
Yeah, I think your last story was Angle of the Light, and that came out in February of last year. And actually I had a bunch of questions on that, but I was thinking to myself, I was like, I've got to narrow this down a little bit. I don't want to just wear him out on this interview, but my favorite part of Angle of the Light was the closing of it when you were wrapping everything up, because I kind of thought you were going to leave me hanging on that story. I thought, well, Soren will kind of leave you. It's not exactly a cliffhanger, and I don't know enough about writing technique to kind of know what you're doing, but it's kind of like, wow, it's like, what just happened? But you wrapped up everything so neatly in that story. And you talked about the 3 women characters in it and about how he decided not to pursue a romantic relationship because, there was this deeper magic. I mean, it was like a deeper sense of human relationship with them. And just the way you worded that I really, really appreciated that in the story. And I thought it was a great kind of turn to it, because I kind of feel like any other author, would have pursued a romantic relationship with, his main character with one of those women. But the entire story was just a good human story. It's like, this is what people deal with. And February
Yeah, I like
21st, Soren.
I like a good love story like anybody else. But I thought, yeah, how about one where the man comes to realize that he's getting something more from these women, that he can't that it can't ever quite be as special as if he decided to to really follow through on his feelings for whichever one that he did have feelings for. I thought that would be interesting. And the nice thing about something that's not horror or suspense is that I don't feel bad at all about wrapping everything up nice and neat. I like dangling creepy loose ends in suspense and horror fiction, but when it comes to kind of a heartfelt melodrama, I like it when everything just it's put into a bow, as long as it's done truthfully and honestly.
Well, that's something I can say that story is. It's truthful and it's very, very honest. Now, my absolute, well, I'm trying to think. That would be a close toss-up between an oral history of hell and Song of the Living Dead. In fact, I'm going to say that out of those snowy nights you read to me, they'll never be forgotten. Those are my two absolute favorite, especially an oral history of hell. I lost my brother a couple years ago, and his favorite story of yours on Knifepoint Horror was Impound, and we used to listen to it. And even through his depression and the mania that he went through in the last part of his life, that was one of the few things that we could kind of like get out of, I guess our relationship at that point. And, an oral history of hell, like it really hits you in the gut. And here's the kicker for a listener, if you've experienced a little bit of suffering in life, and I don't want to compare mine to anyone else's, but I feel like people who have suffered in life and kind of gone through that dark night of the soul are going to walk away from all of your stories and snowy nights you read to me with a little bit more than someone else who hasn't. But kind of backing the bus up a little bit, I'd like to take us to Song of the Living Dead. And again, this is released on the snowy nights on July 2015. And it is a wonderful example of your voice narration, illustrating for the listeners the two central themes of isolation and fragility of human relationships. We first have the broad societal breakdown after the zombies awaken in Rome. And then we're shown a kind of self-imposed exile by your main character as he travels with his pals, and he's gleaming little insights into their personalities and motivations, which seem to ironically connect him back with society as a whole in the end. And I can't help but get the feeling that this story comes from a deeply personal place in you, in much the same way 3:13 a.m. kind of did with those stories. Is there any real-life connections to the characters and events portrayed, singing zombies aside? Which is an excellent twist on that genre, by the way. I thought that was very, very well done.
Oh yeah, thank you. I always wanted to do a zombie story. I just wanted to do something different. But yes, that was a very personal story in that it is a total act of wish fulfillment. It's a story about wish fulfillment. So you have this guy, and in the breakdown of society that comes when the zombies come, he sees his chance. His life isn't working out so great. He's dead end jobs. He's kind of lost, and he sees the opportunity to do what I have always wanted to do. And to this day, sometimes I just want to get in a car and drive and just be free, just above everything else, be free. So here's a guy who irresponsibly, yes, he sees his chance. And to me, that book is very poignant because there he is, and he's in the van, and he's got these people he really genuinely likes and cares about around him, and he's got the perfectly understanding girlfriend. It's just so wonderful right there, supporting him even with his crazy ideals, and he just goes. And I think I always wanted to be on some level that guy with those friends, with those supportive people around me who say, yeah, it's okay to just get in the van and just drive with no direction, no plan. And and the book is about his feelings about it and how it all works out for him, kind of in some really sad ways, but in some very, very good ways as well, as he tries to he tries to figure out America, where it's going. He's trying to figure out society. He's trying to figure out himself. And yeah, I always liked that story. But yeah, it's not much of a when it comes to killing zombies, it's got some of that, but most of all, it's about a guy just wanting to be free.
And for those who haven't listened to it, I'm definitely not going to give away the ending, because what a wonderful kind of twist ending to it. But what I really appreciated was how you portrayed the zombies. And I believe that when they would rise from the dead as zombies, they were singing this kind of haunting melody. If I'm recalling, any of the facts right, but you had a way where the zombies were so creepy because they weren't scary, because it's kind of like the old Western European notion of the remnant, like this remnant of someone you once knew rose from the grave because the metaphysical alchemy just wasn't quite right. Like the universe itself is off kilter somewhat, and the reality has like bled over into some other weird dimension. And so the zombies have risen up with this weird characteristic. And what made it so terrible is the humanity that you could see in the zombies. And what I loved how you built the tension in that story, when your characters were sitting around a school, I believe, they'd gotten out of their van, and they're getting this secondary information about, hey, the zombies are starting to change. They're becoming more aggressive, and there's stories of people being attacked. And so, I mean, if anyone is interested in Song of the Living Dead, it's really, really good. And as Soren said, it's not very big on, hey, we need to build a fort. It isn't fort zombie fiction, but to me, it's so much more. And I really, really loved it.
Yeah, I think, I think trying to make the zombies creepy in that it's just not clear what they want. In zombie fiction, the zombies are trying to eat your face, right? But I thought, well, what about a story where they don't know what's going on? Like, why are these? Yeah, there just seem to be these remnants, but what is going on with the zombies? People in the story don't even know.
And what a powerful device for the listener, because like when we're trying to picture that story, when I listened to it for the first time, and like I'm trying to have the software in my brain running to simulate the scenes, the characters, and other, fiction horror that I've listened to, which is really good. I mean, I'm not going to down another author's work, but it's like my brain can kind of generate the room that they're going into. It can generate the next scene before it happens. Mm-hmm. But in Song of the Living Dead, I didn't have that ability. And it's like, if you've ever watched the movie Scarface, there's this expectation of violence from scene to scene, and you can't really predict what the scene is going to do. And that story kind of had that same vibe to it. It's kind of difficult to describe, but I really enjoyed it.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's not one that I would think would have that, but then it's good to know that it did. I think because it is a little bit off kilter. The situation is a little bit unusual. It doesn't not quite following the same zombie script. So it's like, yeah, what the hell is going on here?
It's like a low key fight or flight, and like that's what was kind of creepy about it. Mm. But so I don't know if I make a mistake in doing this, Soren. Maybe you can help me out. But if anyone asks me about Knifepoint Horror or good horror fiction on a podcast to listen to, I automatically recommend An Oral History of Hell. And I just can't help myself. Your writing is so visceral, raw, and you present this image of utter desolation backlit against a shimmering and undefined hope, if only our main character can make it past the perimeter. In fact, I would hazard to suggest, and as someone who really appreciates Joseph Conrad, I don't say this lightly, but I think An Oral History of Hell is our generation's Heart of Darkness, in the sense that what Conrad did is he held up a mirror to late European modernism and colonialism and the dehumanization it was doing to Europe at the time. And I kind of get a sense that an oral history of hell is a mirror of our postmodern society now, to where if you make one little mistake in a society where nothing is ever erased, where there's no chance of reconciliation or forgiveness, where little mistakes is the event horizon of a black hole that you'll just fall down. And I feel like an oral history of hell is in some ways an indictment of this society that we currently live in. Now, that's just my opinion, and I'm voicing it to the author that wrote the freaking thing in front of me. But
that is an awesome interpretation. That's good stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
it's thank you for two reasons, but also thank you for writing it because I have a law enforcement background, and everything that your characters go through, it's like some people will make one little mistake, and it's like a broken glass. I mean, it spider webs out into all these different areas of their life. And I can't help but just think that in a time before the internet, before when someone could go to another town, like you were talking about this yearning to travel and be free, it's almost like we live in a world where no one is free from their own mistakes anymore. I mean, look at people who have had a gaffe, people who have said stuff they shouldn't that gets recorded on the internet for all eternity. And I think of the dehumanization on a physical level that happened in Heart of Darkness, and how when the main character, I kind of get the movie Apocalypse Now in the book. It kind of runs together in my head. I was going to say Colonel Kurtz, but
that's a good
when
thing.
Marlowe, but when he reaches Kurtz in the jungle, he finds basically a shriveled up old man, which is a metaphor for Europe at the time, the European great powers. And our main character in An Oral History of Hell, he goes through this whole journey, and he's in this netherworld, but then he realizes by the note that his friend leaves him that it was either an illusion, but he's able to break out of this vicious cycle that he's found himself in hell, by going through hell. And so my question for you, sorry about that rant, by the way. And
it's excellent stuff.
But did the story achieve what you wanted it to achieve? And what other thoughts and insights can you offer on that, on An Oral History of Hell?
It's I kind of remember wanting to see how dark I could go, but then not just absolutely drown the reader. And it was long before it was an audio book. Can you get so dark and then have a plausible ray of light at the end of this darkness? And you're right. The characters in that book, they're just walking this knife edge. They're just so in life, so close to their own mortality, just constantly, or even just abject failure. Just nothing's working. And I think it was very heavily kind of under the influence of, like your Ingmar Bergman, your Andrei Tarkovsky. Back when I wrote that, of like this, let me just go real dark, and with these wintry, awful landscapes and these people looking within and finding nothing. But can a story be done that goes that dark, but actually still finds some kernel of goodness and some sort of meaning in it all? So I'm glad that story does kind of take a turn eventually. But I don't think I'm the same kind of writer now. I don't think I'll ever go that dark again, because that's a rough one. And I don't want to do that to readers or listeners anymore, even if I can kind of pull them out of it at the end. Oral History of Hell goes maybe one step too far, too often for even my taste. I haven't listened to that one in a long time, because it's I do find it like really bleak for so long. Whew.
It is definitely a bleak story, and it's also a very human story, and it's totally uncontrived. Like, I think that's my returning, my attraction to it is this authentic. And I don't feel like you were trying to say anything beyond what your characters were trying to say. I've read stories in fiction that's very, very dark, and I can sense a philosophical, metaphysical sleight of hand somewhere. Like they're trying to send me a message or trying to tell me something. But what I liked about it was just the raw feelings and emotions of it all.
Yeah, when I wrote that, I was a fair amount younger when I could sort of write about mortality and not bat an eye. And now that the record needles has advanced along the LP of my life to a disturbing degree, now I don't want to go there. But it is a reality that we are with and walking among death all the time. And it just seemed inevitable, like the kind of things that go through my head, that I would actually try to write a story about that sometime. Just, instead of cloaking it in the supernatural, just write about mortality straight up, and the fear of it, the terror of it, the inescapableness of it. Good times for a Friday night. Kick back, open a cold one, and listen to an oral history of hell.
And there we have it, folks. But then again, I enjoy the fiction by horror author B.L. Blankenship. Mm-hmm. And I really like the dark places that he goes in his writing. And there's something there's almost a purity about it. And it's kind of hard for me to describe, but I'm trying to save us from rabbit holes. So I think we can talk about, what a lot of people are probably waiting for is Knifepoint Horror, and kind of getting into that a little bit. So my personal question, as I've always wondered about the logo for Knifepoint Horror, it kind of gives off a sense of Baroque, Lovecraftian-esque like vibes. And I was wondering, where did the design come from? Who designed it? How did you put this thing together? I'm sure there's a good story behind it.
It's the glory of public domain. So Hieronymus Bosch, the artist, has a famous painting called The Garden of Earthly Delights. I don't know how. I think I was probably actively looking for spooky art that I could use freely. And if you zoom in real tight on a small corner of that massive painting, you'll see that little fella who's the logo hiding under the Kleenex or whatever it is. And that just, I zoomed in on that. I'm like, yeah, that thing is the thing. That's the thing. It is just nightmare fuel, that little guy, the little critter. So he's stuck around for many years now.
Have you ever seen Don't Be Afraid of the Dark? And there was an older version of it, and they did a remake. And gosh, his name escapes me. Gosh, he's the same guy that did the Wolfman remake. But
no, I didn't see. I never saw the original. No, I didn't.
Okay, all right. Well, I definitely don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I think that's a discussion for another time then. But it kind of reminded me of the creatures from that. But So my question is,
it's such a simple creature too. There's very little design to that creature. It's so simple. It if I think about it too much, it kind of bothers me.
That is crazy. So I'm definitely going to put that up on this podcast episode or this YouTube episode. Sorry, I'm still in history pod mode right now. But, it's almost like a glimpse of something demonic that you would see out of like the corner of your eye for like a flicker of a second. And you're like, oh my shit, what is that? It's that creepiness.
Yeah.
I love it. But it definitely fits the tenor of Knifepoint Horror. So what is it about horror stories that so intrigues both readers and authors? Why do we keep coming back there?
Well, kind of like when we were talking about an oral history of hell, I think there's something about the confrontation with our own mortality that I think is just so essential to horror, because it ain't horror unless somebody dies, let's face it. And I think it's much the same as when you get on a roller coaster or have a terrifying close call somewhere. People voluntarily terrify themselves to kind of just brush up against the end in some manageable way and then back away from it, nice and safe, and that can feel good. I swear it has something to do with that when I boil it down, which is kind of sick and dark, but it's healthy. I think we're fascinated by demises, and of course in horror, the more spectacular and weird the demise, we're not dealing with someone passing away in their sleep at age 89. We're dealing with the Wolfman coming up behind them, and off goes the head, or the mummy just sidling up and saying "how do." That's the kind of demise that horror gives us, and I think we're just fascinated. We're fascinated when we see it in the news. It's got a dark pull over us, and we're fascinated to kind of brush up against it in fiction. I think there's something there. I've never come up with a better explanation for why people are so into horror.
So is writing horror, is that easy for you?
Less and less. Nothing is ever really easy. I think a lot of it has become muscle memory with horror, because I think maybe I just polluted my mind with too many horror movies, too many horror stories from a young age, and I kind of got into the rhythm of it. So it's easier for me to work out on the page in a way that's maybe makes a satisfying story, but definitely not easy, and not even as easy it was, say, 5 years ago. It only gets tougher.
So can you tell us about your creative process? How do these stories start? Where do you go with it? And, just what's that like? And I'm really curious too, when I ask about creative process, Soren, is, once you've developed a story and you've written a script, where do the sounds come from? Because I've heard, the tracks in the background, and I can tell you put in a ton of thought behind each and every one of them. And a lot of times, a background track will just carry the atmosphere of your story so deeply.
Yeah, that's the only part for me that is just pure fun is, okay, now it's time to add the music and the sounds. Like, what do I want to do? How far do I want to take it? Where do I put them? How long do they last? How loud are they? It's just total experimentation. But essentially, the ideas come very randomly. I never know when they're going to hit. I wish I had some sort of formula. And then after that, it's just a lot of sitting around and thinking and taking long walks and having coffee. And I don't like to sit down in front of the laptop unless I absolutely have to, unless I'm absolutely ready to actually write. I used to be a great believer in the outline. I used to outline everything to within an inch of its life and no more. Now I have more. It's entertaining to me to kind of go out and just wing it, and yes, run into a lot of problems along the way and find things are unworkable, but that's just almost part of the fun. To me, nothing about the actual tap has any allure. It hasn't had that allure in like 20 years. I can't imagine I used to really enjoy that. Now it's like any excuse to get away from the computer. So that's basically it. It's a lot. It's like 80% thinking, and then it mostly all comes out on the laptop in 3 really fast drafts. And then as I record, I'll just improvise changes, just constantly. I was looking at on my laptop the files for the most recent Knifepoint Horror story. It was like a half an hour. It was about a guy afraid of his own laundry.
Cleanse. Oh man, that was hilarious.
Well, when I realized
yeah.
So did you find it? Yeah, I find it kind of disturbing, that story myself, but a lot of people just find it. Maybe I made it a little bit too funny because it kind of creeps me out. But looking, I look at the file folders for that, and I see there are like 25 separate tracks of like punch-ins that I had to do. There's like 11 versions that say final version on it, but then like I hated something. Like moving the music around 2 seconds each way. There's like 20 different versions of that. It's just like, oh, I didn't think I was a perfectionist, but apparently I just can't let certain things go. It's very, so I never know what's going to just take forever to do.
The really creepy part of that story was when the character came into the amphitheater, and there was like the pile of it, and like your description of it, like the stains of humanity. And me and my wife were talking about the story, and we were wondering, like, so he covered himself in a tide, and we were wondering, I was like, did he really kill his sister? And was that his blood? Was this all in his head? And that was kind of like left open to us. And I was like, what if he was really covered in blood and he was just like some like crazy dude? But I listened to it a second time, but it looks like you're about to say something.
Well, yeah, I never thought of the tide as blood because, yeah. And, the reason we have kind of this little bit of a preamble in front of that story, and even in the description of the story, when I posted it, you'll see that, yeah, he killed his sister. He has just gone so far into the metaphor, maybe in the hopes that it will bring some kind of sense to his sad existence, that he's just completely lost. So to me, he is simply a murderer who has gone totally off his nut in kind of a darkly funny way. But we must never forget that he is telling the story from a prison cell. So he's hardcore.
One of the things that you did in that story that added a whole other dimension to it for me was his buddy, quote unquote, who may or may not be real and a very unreliable narrator telling this, but his buddy who he called kind of gave him some information about this entity and like, how this epiphenomenal event would happen where like human emotions and psychology would literally kind of take on a life of its own. And it added like a mythos to the story. I was like, dang, he just kind of slipped a little, a mythos in this. I was like, there's a lot going on in that.
I would like someone to build on that mythos. Someone please take that to the next step.
That would be hilarious.
Yeah, to me that character is, I like to think that character is actually,
yes,
on the phone with him and actually does believe in the sentience of Laundry, and it's just contributing to the poor guy's madness. This guy, it's one of those crazy conspiracy theorists who's just taking it to the nth degree, but not realizing the damage that he's doing to this guy's mind. But let's get that mythos going. Let's get the Laundry taking over the world mythos.
Well, I tell you what, I know enough bullshit philosophy and comparative religions. I'm sure that we could cook something up.
I'm ready.
We could do it.
Especially if it involves, good solid merch sales. Yeah. Let's do it.
There we go. All right. You see, I knew it. You really wanted to go mainstream, Soren. Smoked you out. So my two favorite stories on Knifepoint Horror would have to be Impound, and the next one you have yet to write. That's my other favorite one too. Do you have a favorite story and one that resonates with you that you've written in Knifepoint Horror?
I have a new one that I think I really like how it turned out, which is a very recent one called The Smoke Child.
Oh,
and
yeah,
I like it because,
okay.
it's a lot of different kinds of stories in one package. A little true crime, a little mystery, some supernatural, some good old-fashioned almost slasher vibe. And part of the reason I wrote it was because, teenagers in horror movies are so stupid. They're so despicable. I hate them all. Like, why can't a slasher story ever feature the kind of teenagers that I kind of remember from high school? This little subset, this little group who make all the right decisions, who are good kids, who are very aware and very respectful of the dangers of the world, but nevertheless, when the slashing comes, they're just, it's a problem. So I did like that one. I like the fact that it kind of experimented with the audio format a little bit, did it somewhat differently, and I just I wound up kind of grooving to that one. I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out, but I like the Smoke Child these days.
So the Smoke Child was the one that was a bit of a frame story. Like, wasn't there a lecture at the very beginning? And
yeah, it's in the form of the guy who went through this is simply giving
right.
a lecture. It's not clear where. Maybe it's in the back of some bookstore. Maybe it's in some college hall. You're never quite sure. But he's got his PowerPoints. He's got his, and it was just kind of an experiment in understatement. He's always found that one of the best ways to tell a really good scary story is to completely undertell it with the emotions. I usually go a little bit over the top with the narrations. And here's a guy who comes along and says, "Oh, by the way, here's what happened to me and my friends 30 years ago." And he almost never cracks as he tells these horrifying things. It's kind of based on a real lecture I saw John Krakauer, the author, give about the Mount Everest disaster. I thought, how awesome. This guy is just completely, level-headed, almost cheerful, and what he's describing is so horrifying that it's really working. He's not trying to sell you the story. He knows the story is selling itself. I thought, I want to do something like that.
I was going to say that it added a whole other layer to it, and one that I really appreciated. But definitely the PowerPoint, and like you said, just the under representation of what it is. A very powerful, effective story.
Now, I like Impound a lot too, and I tell you, there's something about. Sometimes there's one of the stories where one of the visuals just sticks in my brain very intensely, and it's the visual of the guy. There's a scene where he's trying to get out of that lot, and it's kind of raining, and he's in the car, and he's trying to inch his way
windshield
forward.
Wipers, yeah.
And then he sees this guy. The moment where he sees the guy. It's
the wheelbarrow that had the tarp over it, and the arm came up. Yeah.
For some reason, cool. I was just there. I can see that so strongly. It doesn't happen a lot, but that was a case where I've never gotten that out of my mind. Like, that really felt as I was writing that one, like I was really there.
So, did the idea for Impound, did that start off, Soren, as an image that you had in your head, like a vision of the single scene that you built off of?
Yeah, I walked past one of those places. It was just this massive junkyard / impound lot. And I remember the terrain was just odd. Like the terrain was entirely dirt. It wasn't paved or anything. And it's sort of like an upslope. I thought, what an eerie place this would be at 2 a.m. And then I got to thinking about, I'd always kind of wanted to do a little bit of a twist on sort of alien stories, just a subtle twist. Like how subtle can you make it? And then it all came together after that. But it was that one was okay. That's a spooky ass place that I just walked past. That's got to be a story.
My favorite part of that story was when the guy went to the house and he's trying to forget this memory. He's trying to bury it, which is a great metaphor for the very real body, I think, that was buried, this crime that he had committed. But he goes into the house and like, it's almost like this initiation almost for our character. Like he's going through, he's isolated, and then he's drawn into like, the outer layer of the house. Then he goes in deeper and deeper, and inside of the house sits this dark secret in carnage. I mean, he sees, the homicide scene that happened down there. And any moment I was expecting like a John Carpenter, The Thing, to come out. But what's worse is that he heard it on the other side of that door. And it's like the fate of the world was like balanced in his decision. And that's what I love about the universe of Knifepoint Horror. Is it's like people will make mistakes and it just cascades. I mean, it just goes and goes and goes. And really, really powerful effect when I was listening to it. But that was my biggest takeaway from Impound. And
that's
I don't know.
Like what you're talking about before. Like that's a very uncomfortable story because it's the worst case scenario of you did one thing 25 years ago and you cannot escape it, and it's just lurking out there. And if the wrong person remembers the wrong thing at the wrong time, here it comes back. And that to me is very uncomfortable. And yeah, more than ever, that's the world we're living in.
100%. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, there's no escaping it. And it seems like the event horizon of the one bad decision that could destroy anybody, where does it begin? At what point can someone cross over and make a bad decision and they're irredeemable? And, what does that say about everyone else? But yeah, Impound definitely had a lot going on.
Yeah, like, when you yourself are arrested 10 years from now for stealing priceless art treasures, and I'm associated with you through this video on YouTube, how I will rue the day that I spoke to you, suspecting that you were, in fact, an art thief. Look at how you're dressed. You're dressed so well. It's almost like you're trying to hide something about yourself. Art thief. I'm just going to go out on a limb and just take a wild guess.
I knew it. No, I promise. I found it at Goodwill, Soren. I found it at Goodwill. That's all it is. It was trees, nothing more. But yeah. And what they would do is they would take me at the most, unflattering pose possible. They'll frame phrase it, and they'll have that, and then they'll have you right next to it in question marks. And oh man, he associates with it. And then they'll take a compilation of like the darkest part of your writing, and that's all that anyone is going to talk about.
Right. He hinted that he was in cahoots with this Frank.
Yeah.
In this,
he was there.
The digital world. This is it. Good times.
Yeah. Sir. I love it. I love it. So, where do you see Knifepoint Horror moving into the future, Soren?
It's still like a very really interesting challenge for me to think of these things and to follow through and to struggle often through writing them. But and it still feels really good when people say that they have a long car trip coming up and they like it when there's like a new knife point that they can listen to for that. I think that's terrific. So as of now, even though I do feel like I'm losing a little bit of my hold on other kinds of writing little by little, it's still, when a good idea comes, it's still about as entertaining and rewarding as it gets. So I don't know when it'll end. I really don't. I always 2 or 3 times I thought I got nothing left. But then it's weird, the creative spark just comes back for whatever reason. I always figured I only had a certain number of creative years, like a lot of people. And sometimes I think I'm at the end, like, I got nothing. But so far it's proven to be false. So we will see. But I don't enjoy that feeling of finding that really spooky moment in a story, like, yeah, that's the moment, and typing it up and recording it. I still love that. I love doing that.
Well, I hope you keep on doing it for many, many, many years, Soren, because myself, all of your listeners out there, the people that consume your work, it really kind of helps us get through the grind, helps us kind of, it helps make us feel thankful for what we have. So that's what it does, especially some of the more darker stories and the relationships in our life. And, so definitely, I think that you've got at least another 40 years ahead of you. So you better just buckle down, get used to it. They're going to be coming out with CRISPR. It's going to alter our genome. They're going to expand our lives, do all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, please go on.
I was going to say, isn't it interesting how like these dark supernatural stories, it's like comfort food. It's just. I find it tough to explain. I don't even know psychologically why that is. But when times are tough and the world is bleak, I don't want a Hallmark movie. I just want more good horror. That's like the place I want to go to get away from it. So it does make me feel good if I can give that comfort food kind of chicken pot pie to people. If it's horror, then it's horror. It's great.
The best thing about it is that it will make the listener forget whatever they're going through, if just for a little bit. Like you will forget, really bad stuff that you're going through. If only for 30 seconds here or there. But that's what your writing does for me. I've talked to many other people that love your work, and they say the same thing. So
that's good. I'm glad, whatever form it took, I'm glad. Just want to make some person happy for 45 seconds out there in the wilderness of this difficult life. Happy to do it.
Well, hopefully you have made our listeners and viewers very, very happy for I'm guessing about an hour and almost 10 minutes. No, that's an hour and a half. Wow. Has it been an hour and a half, Soren? I can't believe it.
Feature-length production. Wow.
I am looking at that. Wow. And here you are saying that you don't want to do movies, but and with an art thief, no less.
I was kind of hoping that when you started talking about like the size of the universe and whatnot, I was hoping that you would just roll with that to the point where we would just forget what time it was. Because man, I could talk about that all day because I know nothing about it.
I could talk about that a lot, and I really hope that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, there's some really like some interesting works out there on that very subject, and I would love to have you back on again, Soren, and it can just be a rabbit hole feast day, is what it can be.
That's good. We can discuss my 2 attempts to make it through A Brief History of Time before my brain collapsed in on itself. Yeah,
there's definitely some other works that were. Yeah, I mean, of course, there's no way that, I could ever produce a work like that, but there's some really, really cool podcasts that are floating around out there. And I think John Michael Goldier probably has the best one as far as like, the sciencey stuff and like the size of the universe. And he ties in so many different topics, history, philosophy. And I tend to get more out of audio stuff these days, mainly because I'm just so damn busy. I mean, I have my ride into work. I have my lunch break, the ride back home from work, and a little bit of time with my wife in the morning whenever we're drinking coffee to listen to something. So, which is when we listen to Cleanse. So that was it.
Yeah, I like a good history podcast too. I recently went through, Dan Carlin did. 13 hours on World War I, and I was just swimming in that, just happy as a clam. So, yeah, the big issues we need to tackle and solve, I might add, the big issues of life in the universe and history on your show.
I am down for it. We will talk, say when and where. I'm always ready to rumble on those topics. Those are my favorite topics. I love them.
Yeah.
Well, Soren, thank you very much for coming on here, enlightening us all, kind of shining a little bit of light on the other side of your creepy logo.
Glad to do it. Happy to be here. Anytime.
Awesome. I look forward to talking to you again, and I hope you have a good night.
You too.